As I descended into the dark, cold abyss of the Atlantic, the weight of the ocean pressed down on me. But it was nothing compared to the weight of history I was about to confront. The wreck of the RMS Titanic loomed ahead, a ghostly shadow in the deep. The once majestic liner now lay in eternal slumber, fractured and decaying, a tomb for over 1,000 souls lost in one of the greatest maritime disasters in history. The submersible hummed softly, the only sound in the vast silence that surrounded me. The cold, dark water seemed to pulse with a life of its own, the kind of life that has never known the touch of the sun. My heart pounded in my chest as the wreck came into view, its rusted iron and twisted metal a stark reminder of the night the unsinkable ship met its tragic fate. I had always been fascinated by the Titanic, drawn to it like a moth to a flame. The stories, the mysteries, the unanswered questions, they all called to me, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality of seeing it with my own eyes, of being so close to the final resting place of so many. The lights of the submersible cut through the murky water, illuminating the grand staircase, now a broken ruin. It was surreal, like looking at a photograph from the past that had been torn and faded over time. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the eyes of the dead were on me, judging me for disturbing their peace. My comms crackled to life, breaking the eerie silence. "You all right down there?" the voice of the expedition leader asked, his tone light, trying to mask the unease we all felt. "Yeah," I replied, my voice sounding small and distant even to my own ears. "Just taking it all in." I steered the submersible closer to the wreck, my hands trembling slightly on the controls. As I moved past the broken remnants of the upper deck, something caught my eye. A flash of movement in the corner of the screen. I jerked the controls, the submersible turning sharply. Nothing, just the endless dark, the wreck looming silently. A trick of the light, I told myself. It had to be, but my heart was racing, my skin prickling with a fear I couldn't explain. I shook my head and focused on the task at hand. We were here to collect samples, to study the wreck, to uncover more of its secrets. There was no time for foolishness, no time to let my imagination run wild. But as I maneuvered the submersible deeper into the wreck, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The darkness seemed to close in around me, the silence deafening. My breath echoed in the small cabin, loud and fast. I glanced at the monitors, at the distorted images of the wreck around me, and felt a chill run down my spine. And then I saw it, a face, pale, ghostly, staring back at me through the porthole. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The face was gone in an instant, but the image burned into my mind. A man, eyes wide with terror, mouth open in a silent scream. I blinked, trying to clear my head. It couldn't be real. It couldn't be. But the fear that gripped me was all too real. I reached for the controls, my hands shaking as I prepared to ascend, to get away from this cursed place. But then the lights flickered. The submersible shuddered, the power fluctuating. The controls went dead in my hands, and the lights went out completely, plunging me into darkness. I sat in the pitch black, my heart pounding, the silence pressing in on me. I fumbled for the emergency lights, my hands shaking uncontrollably. When the dim red lights finally flickered on, I wished they hadn't. The face was there again, pressed against the porthole, eyes wide and staring, the mouth moving as if trying to speak. And this time I could hear it. A faint whisper, a voice from beyond, echoing in the depths of my mind. "Help us!" I screamed, kicking at the controls, trying to make the submersible move, to get away, but it was no use. The face remained, the whisper growing louder, filling my head, drowning out my thoughts. "Help us! Save us!" I closed my eyes, my hands clutching at the controls, praying for the power to return, for anything to happen that would end this nightmare. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the whispering stopped. The face vanished, and the lights flickered back to life. The submersible lurched forward as the controls came back online, and I wasted no time in ascending, desperate to escape the darkness, the cold, the ghosts that haunted this place. But as I rose, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, something unseen, something that had latched onto me, refusing to let go. The words echoed in my mind, a ghostly refrain that chilled me to my core. "Help us!" I knew then that I had disturbed something far beyond my understanding. Something that had been waiting in the dark, in the cold, for someone to hear its call. And I knew that this was only the beginning. I surfaced in a frenzy, my hands still trembling as I clambered out of the submersible. The cold air hit me like a slap, but it did nothing to clear the fog of fear that had settled over my mind. The crew, who had been eagerly waiting for my return, noticed my ashen face and wide eyes. "What happened down there?" one of them asked, his voice a mix of concern and curiosity. I hesitated, glancing back at the submersible, half expecting to see that ghostly face staring back at me from the porthole. But there was nothing, just the empty, dark depths below. "Nothing," I muttered, forcing a shaky smile. "Just, the pressure got to me. I thought I saw something, but it was probably just the lights playing tricks." I could tell they didn't believe me. Hell, I didn't believe me! But what could I say? That the Titanic's ghosts had reached out to me from beyond the grave, that I'd heard their whispers, felt their cold, desperate fingers brush against my soul. No, that would only get me laughed off the ship, or worse, labeled insane. I tried to shake it off, to convince myself that it was just the stress, the pressure, maybe even a touch of nitrogen narcosis. But as the hours passed and the sun set, plunging us back into darkness, I found no solace. The whispers hadn't left me. They were quieter now, but still there, a low murmur at the edge of my consciousness, like the faint echo of a forgotten nightmare. I could barely eat, and sleep was out of the question. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face, heard those words, felt that icy fear gripping my heart. I wandered the deck aimlessly, trying to clear my head, trying to convince myself that I was still sane. As I leaned against the railing, staring out at the endless expanse of dark water, I heard a noise behind me, a soft shuffle, the creak of the deck. I turned sharply, my breath catching in my throat. There was nothing there. The deck was empty, the only sound the soft lapping of the waves against the hull. I turned back, shaking my head. I was letting my imagination get the best of me. But then I heard it again, closer this time. A faint, distant wail, like the cry of someone in terrible pain. My blood ran cold. I gripped the railing tighter, my knuckles white. "Is anyone there?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. The wind answered, a low moan that seemed to carry with it the voices of the dead. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed away from the railing, my eyes darting around the empty deck. I could feel them, their presence, growing stronger, more insistent. "Help us!" The voice was louder now, clearer, as if someone was standing right behind me. I spun around, but there was still no one there. My breath came in ragged gasps, my mind racing. This wasn't real! It couldn't be real. But the ship seemed to hum with a life of its own, the metal groaning and creaking as if under some unseen strain. I could feel the vibrations under my feet, a deep, rhythmic thrum that resonated through my bones. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move, a shadow, flitting across the deck. I turned quickly, my heart leaping into my throat. The shadow was gone, but the feeling remained. I wasn't alone. The whispering grew louder, more urgent, filling my head, drowning out all other thoughts. My vision blurred, the world spinning around me as I stumbled back, clutching at my ears, trying to block out the voices. "Help us! Save us!" I could feel them closing in, their cold, dead hands reaching for me, their faces twisted in anguish, eyes wide with terror. They were everywhere, surrounding me, their pain, their desperation, seeping into my very soul. And then just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The whispers ceased, the shadows vanished, and I was left alone, gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my chest. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, trying to calm the storm of fear raging inside me. But the silence that followed was almost worse, a heavy, oppressive silence that pressed down on me like a weight. I knew then that I couldn't stay on the ship. Whatever was haunting me, whatever had followed me from the depths of the Titanic wasn't going to let me go. It wanted something from me, needed something from me. I had to get back down there. I had to find out what they wanted. What was keeping them trapped in this eternal torment? The thought filled me with dread, but I knew I had no choice. I was bound to them now, tied to the fate of the Titanic and the souls who had perished with it. As I made my way to the captain to request another dive, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning, that the horrors I had witnessed were just a prelude to something far more terrifying, something that would haunt me for the rest of my days. The captain was hesitant when I asked for another dive, his eyes narrowing with concern. I could see the doubt in his expression, the way he studied me as if trying to gauge whether I was truly fit to return to the depths. But I was insistent, desperate. I had to know what was happening, what the voices wanted from me. He finally relented, though I could tell he didn't like it. The next morning I found myself once again sealed in the submersible, the cold metal walls pressing in around me. As we descended into the abyss, the water growing darker and colder with every meter, my heart pounded in time with the slow thrum of the engine. The wreck of the Titanic emerged from the blackness like a ghostly specter, its broken form a solemn reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded here over a century ago. But this time, something felt different. The air inside the submersible was thick with an oppressive energy, a heaviness that made it hard to breathe. I could feel their presence before I even reached the wreck, a sense of anticipation that prickled at the edges of my awareness. I guided the submersible closer to the ship, my hands steady on the controls despite the fear gnawing at my insides. The grand staircase came into view, its once opulent structure now a decaying ruin. I stared at it, half expecting to see the ghostly figure from before. But there was nothing. Only the dark, silent remains of the ship. I continued deeper into the wreck, navigating through the narrow passageways and shattered corridors. The further I went, the stronger the feeling became. The sense that I was not alone, that unseen eyes were watching my every move. The shadows seemed to shift and move on their own, flitting at the edges of my vision, just beyond the reach of the submersible's lights. And then I saw it again. A flash of movement, something darting between the jagged remnants of the ship. I turned sharply, the submersible groaning as I maneuvered through the tight spaces. My breath caught in my throat as the lights swept across a figure standing in the wreckage, just outside the sub's porthole. It was a woman, dressed in the tattered remains of an elegant gown, her hair flowing around her as if caught in an unseen current. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow and filled with an unspeakable sadness. She stared at me, her mouth moving silently, her expression pleading. I was frozen, unable to tear my eyes away from her. The whispers returned, louder this time, a cacophony of voices overlapping, echoing in my mind. "Help us! Save us! Don't leave us!" The words tangled together, growing more frantic, more desperate with every passing second. The woman reached out, her hand pressing against the porthole, and I felt a cold, icy chill seep through the glass, through the walls of the submersible, into my very bones. Her eyes locked onto mine, and I saw in them a depth of despair that shook me to my core. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I don't know how to help you." But the voices didn't relent. They grew louder, more insistent, as if trying to pull me down into the depths with them. The submersible shook violently, the lights flickering as the power fluctuated. I gripped the controls, fighting to keep the sub steady, but it felt as though some unseen force was trying to drag me down, to trap me here with them. Panic surged through me. I couldn't stay here. I had to get out, had to escape before it was too late. I pulled the controls back, forcing the sub to ascend, but the ship groaned in protest, the metal creaking as if it were being torn apart. The woman's face contorted in anguish as the sub began to rise, her hands still pressed against the glass. The whispers turned to screams, voices filled with rage and sorrow, a terrifying chorus that echoed through the small cabin.
"No! Don't leave us! You can't leave us!"
The lights flickered wildly, casting the wreck in a strobe-like effect, making the shadows twist and writhe. I could barely see, barely think, as the screams grew louder, a deafening roar that threatened to shatter my sanity. And then just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The submersible broke free from the wreck, the voices silencing, the power stabilizing. I gasped for breath, my heart hammering in my chest, the cold sweat clinging to my skin. I looked down, expecting to see the woman's face staring back at me, but there was nothing. Just the dark, empty ocean below. But I wasn't safe yet. The submersible continued its ascent. But something was wrong. The instruments flickered erratically, the controls sluggish under my hands. It felt as if the very water around me was thickening, pulling me back down. As I neared the surface, I saw something in the darkness. A shadow, enormous and hulking, moving through the water. My breath caught in my throat as I realized what it was. It was the Titanic, or rather a twisted, ghostly version of it, rising from the depths like a monstrous leviathan. The ship, or whatever it had become, was moving, its shattered hull creaking and groaning as it ascended. And it was coming for me. I could feel its pull, the icy tendrils of its curse reaching out to drag me back down. I pushed the controls to their limit, the sub groaning in protest as it fought to break free. The surface was so close. I could see the faint light filtering down from above, feel the tension in the water easing. But then, just as I was about to break through, the lights went out. The submersible shuddered violently, and I felt the cold embrace of the deep closing in around me. In the pitch black, I heard the whispers again, soft and insidious, wrapping around me like a noose.
"Come back! You belong with us!"
And then, a hand, icy and deathly, brushed against the back of my neck. My scream echoed in the darkness, and the last thing I saw was the Titanic's ghostly form looming above me, ready to swallow me whole. And then nothing. I woke up in the ship's medical bay, gasping for air, my body drenched in sweat. The crew was around me, their faces pale and worried. I tried to speak, to tell them what I had seen, what had happened, but the words wouldn't come. The doctor gave me a sedative, and as the world faded to black, the last thing I heard was the faint echo of those whispers in my mind. "Come back! Come back!" And deep down, I knew I would have no choice. They wouldn't let me go. Not until I had given them what they wanted. Days passed since my harrowing escape from the depths, but peace never came. The whispers haunted my waking hours, the shadows of the Titanic's past lingering in the corners of my vision. Sleep was a fleeting memory, my nights filled with dreams that were not my own. Visions of drowning, of icy water filling my lungs, of being trapped beneath the crushing weight of the ocean. The crew tried to comfort me, telling me that it was all in my head, that I just needed rest. But I knew the truth. The ghosts of the Titanic had marked me, and no matter how far I ran, they would always find me. I had disturbed their grave, and they would never let me forget it. I knew I had to go back. There was no other way. The Titanic had taken something from me, my sanity, my peace, and it would never stop until it had taken everything. But more than that, I needed answers. I needed to understand why they had chosen me, what they wanted, and why their souls were still trapped in that watery tomb. So, against all reason and with a heart full of dread, I prepared for one final descent. The captain tried to stop me, his face pale with concern, but I was resolute. There was nothing left for me up here, not anymore. My fate was tied to the Titanic, and I had to see it through to the end. The ocean was eerily calm as I descended for the last time. The water so still it felt like I was sinking into an abyss of nothingness. The wreck loomed ahead, its ghostly form emerging from the dark like a specter, waiting for me. As I approached the ship, the lights of the sub flickered, the power fluctuating just as it had before. But this time I was not afraid. I was beyond fear, driven by something deeper, something that had taken root in my soul. The whispers returned, but they were different now. Softer, almost soothing, like the distant echoes of a forgotten lullaby. Come to us. Join us. I maneuvered the submersible toward the grand staircase, where I had seen the woman before. The wreck was quiet, the shadows still, but I could feel them watching, waiting for me to make my move. I stopped the sub and took a deep breath, knowing what I had to do. My hands shook as I reached for the hatch, unlocking it slowly, feeling the cold press of the water as it seeped in. The pressure was immense, but I no longer cared. I opened the hatch completely, letting the water rush in, pulling me out into the darkness. The cold was unbearable, but I pushed through it, swimming toward the ship, the light of the submersible fading behind me. The Titanic's decaying form rose above me, an ancient monolith of despair and death. And I knew that I was finally where I was meant to be. I reached the grand staircase, the eerie silence only broken by the sound of my own breathing. I could feel them now, all around me, ghostly figures moving in the shadows, watching, waiting. And then she appeared, the woman in the tattered gown, her hair flowing around her like seaweed, her eyes locked onto mine. This time I didn't flinch. I stood my ground, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I faced her. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, my voice trembling in the water.
Why won't you let me go?
Her eyes, filled with sadness and regret, softened. She reached out, her hand passing through the water, and touched my cheek. The cold seeped into my skin, but there was no pain, only a profound sense of loss, of mourning. "You came to us," her voice whispered, not from her lips but from the depths of my mind. "You disturbed our rest. You awoke us from the darkness, and now we are bound to you, as you are bound to us." "I didn't mean to," I choked out, the pressure of the water making it difficult to breathe. "I just wanted to understand." She smiled, a sad, haunting smile. "And now you will." The shadows around us began to move, the figures of the dead emerging from the darkness, their eyes empty, their faces twisted in pain. They surrounded me, their hands reaching out, touching, pulling, dragging me down into the cold embrace of the sea. I struggled, but it was no use. The water was too strong, their grip too firm. The last of my air escaped in a stream of bubbles, and I felt my lungs burning, the icy water rushing in. But just as I thought it was the end, the woman's voice echoed in my mind once more. "Help us!" And in that moment I understood. The visions, the whispers, the torment. It wasn't just about the tragedy of the Titanic. It was about the souls who had been forgotten, left to wander the deep with no peace, no rest. They weren't trying to take me. They were asking for salvation. I closed my eyes, surrendering to the darkness, letting it take me. The cold faded, the pressure lifted, and I felt a strange warmth wash over me. The whispers grew louder, filling my mind, my soul, until they were all I could hear.
Save us! Set us free!
And then just as suddenly as it began, it was over. The cold was gone, replaced by a comforting warmth. I opened my eyes to find myself standing on the grand staircase, but it wasn't in ruins anymore. It was whole, restored to its former glory, as if the ship had been pulled from the depths and brought back to life. The ghosts were still there, but they were different, no longer twisted in pain, but peaceful, their eyes closed as if in sleep. The woman stood before me, her face serene, her smile no longer sad. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice like a soft breeze. "You have given us what we needed, what we could not find on our own." I nodded, tears streaming down my face as the realization washed over me. I had freed them from the torment of their unfinished lives, their tragic deaths. They were at peace now, and so was I. The vision began to fade, the warmth receding as the darkness returned. I felt myself being pulled away, back to the world above, back to the light. When I woke, I was on the surface, lying on the deck of the ship, gasping for breath. The crew surrounded me, their faces a mix of relief and confusion.
You're alive!
One of them exclaimed, his voice filled with disbelief. We thought we'd lost you. I looked up at the sky, the stars shining brightly above, and smiled. The whispers were gone, the shadows no longer lurking in the corners of my mind. The ghost of the Titanic had been laid to rest, and with them, my fear, my guilt. But as I stood, feeling the solid deck beneath my feet, I couldn't help but glance back at the ocean, at the place where the Titanic rested far below. The sea was calm, but I knew that the memories of that place would stay with me forever. And somewhere, deep in the abyss, I hoped that those lost souls had finally found their way home.